Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SmartList on Steroids. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rod O'Connor. I'm a product specialist here at E1 Solutions. So you may rub up against me when you're using our services team or talking to any member of our sales team. I do a lot of the demos and training around here, so it's not uncommon that you may have heard me before. So today we're going to be talking about SmartList on steroids. At least that's what my marketing team wanted me to call this particular not podcast, it's a webinar. Now when I think about something on steroids, I think about an incremental change. So if I'm a bodybuilder, I take some steroids to kind of get me to the next level, give me a little extra cut, a slightly bigger muscle, whatever it is. If I'm a swimmer, I'm taking it for, I don't know, I'm not a swimmer, so I'm not sure what they actually take it for. But my whole point is it's really meant to enhance some feature, something specific. And when I think about PopDoc versus SmartList and SmartList Builder, I don't see an incremental change where we're talking about a massive, massive difference. So if we were using the same analogy of a person taking something and becoming something more, I really think more of the Incredible Hulk. So Bruce Banner he didn't take gamma radiation, but he got irradiated and he became the Hulk. And the Hulk was just bigger and stronger and could do way more things than ever imagined by Bruce Banner. So when I think about PopDoc, it really has gone not just to the next level, but well beyond the next level. So that's what we're going to try to cover off today and show you, not only the same features you've come to know and love with your SmartList and your SmartList Builder, but also where those have been enhanced and blown out to almost superpower level. Okay, so with that preamble, I am changing the name of this webinar to SmartList on Gamma Radiation. So now that it's in the recording, my marketing team will just have to accept that this is what we're calling this now. All right, before I dive into it, I wanted to give a quick overview of SmartList and SmartList Builder. Okay, now it's not meant to be a comprehensive dive into the features of either of those products, but maybe some people on the call, we've got, about 50 of you now. Maybe some of you haven't looked at the products for a while or really haven't paid attention to what it is that they do. So this is just meant to be a really quick synopsis. And don't worry, we're almost done with the slides already. This is not going to be a PowerPoint heavy presentation. So if we start with SmartList itself, which is what my end users are experiencing, it is meant to be a user-driven query tool. Still to this day, not a lot of mid-market ERP solutions have anything like SmartList. It truly is one of the greatest features, I think, built into a mid-market ERP out there. Okay, now all of the data is in real time, so we don't have this concept of data warehousing or anything like that. And the most important feature for me, it was no code. I could train pretty much anybody to go in and build a smart list and build a really cool ad hoc reporting tool, and they didn't need to know any coding language. So that was pretty cool. Okay, and obviously every accountant everywhere, doesn't matter what you show them or how cool it is, they want to know, can it be exported to Excel? And yes, over the years we have learned that we can export our smart lists to Excel. Now, because SmartList was so exciting, eventually came along a tool called SmartList Builder. Okay, now the most basic description of SmartList Builder is it allows you to create and modify smart lists. Okay, now not only the new smart list from scratch, but you can also modify the out-of-the-box smart list from GP, which is, again, pretty awesome. The data available on the smart list can actually come from anywhere in your GP environment. So all of the tables associated with GP, including all of your ISV products, you can select those using their display names. Now, for those of you who don't know what I mean when I say that, it's the plain English names. So you don't need to know that all of your customers are stored in the table RM00101. You can just look for your customer master table within SmartList Builder. Okay, all of the columns, again, are going to be in that plain English with the display name. Okay, You can also get your extender windows and forms. So for those of you who are using Extender, which is another E1 Solutions product for Dynamics GP, all of your extender windows and forms can be added to the SmartList. And again, it's all going to be the field names, the plain English names of those fields, not the database name for those fields, which is actually pretty goofy if you look in the back end. Okay. If you happen to have custom SQL tables or views, you can use those as well. Pull them into your SmartList, assuming, of course, they exist somewhere within your Dynamics GP environment. Okay. Now, once you've identified that data source and set that up, you can start to flesh out the actual SmartList itself. So you can define what the columns are available to the users, which ones are going to be the default. You can add calculated fields if you need to, or if you're building a when you're building the list, if you're thinking of the end users, hopefully you're going to build in some go-tos there, so allow them to drill around either to other smart lists or to different parts of GP that make sense for whatever records they're looking at. Really give the list a little bit of oomph and make it smart. Okay, and finally, you can add any data restrictions here that you don't want the user to override. So maybe a particular division or a particular series of GL accounts or something along those lines. Okay. Once those smart lists have been built, the users can then access those smart lists through either SmartList, the actual app within GP, or Smart View, which is another way to view smart lists, which again is another E1 product out there that some of you will own. All right, so that's kind of our high-level broad strokes overview. I want to get into, before I get into the actual PopDoc product, I want to talk about the 5 pillars of PopDoc. And a lot of them are going to sound familiar if you think back on those past 2 slides. Okay, so the first pillar of PopDoc, or the first thing that we think about when we're designing a PopDoc feature, is it's user-driven. Okay, so you're going to see throughout, I'm going to show you a bunch of places where I'm going to point out to you, you're not writing code, you're making choices. Okay, so users can get in there building custom lists, but also that same smart list mentality of ad hoc reporting that my users can get in there without having to phone IT, that fits in under user-driven as well. Again, it's real time, so all of my data, as soon as I click on refresh and Skippy starts skipping, it's reaching into my data source and pulling that data in real time. So again, we're not a data warehousing or old school BI application. Okay, now here's where we start to kind of get away from what we had in that smart list realm. My data can come from anywhere. So not just from GP, it can come from anywhere. I'll get into that in more detail when we talk about connections, but just know that if I have data, I can get it into PopDoc. Okay. Next is presented anywhere. We'll touch on this a little bit today, just to show that, I can access this data from anywhere that I have an internet connection. That's true. But I can also access this data in other systems that my users are working in. So I'll show you a couple of examples of that. And then finally is interactive, which again, we got in that SmartList environment through the go-tos. But we go a little bit further. We've also got something called actions, which I'll talk about as well. All right, I promised you there wouldn't be that many slides, and we are through them. We will come back later to do a quick thank you, but we're out of the PowerPoint now. One thing I didn't mention before I dove in here was I'm pretty informal with this stuff, so anyone who doesn't know me, that's true. If you do have questions, please ask them along the way. You should be able to throw them into the questions portion of GoToWebinar, or you can throw them in the chat. I do have them both open. Now it is on a different screen, but I'll try and answer them as quickly as I can when you guys ask them. All right, so let's jump into PopDoc really quick. And I want to jump straight into a list, okay? So I'm going to use a collections list, which is pulling from the Dynamics GP customers list, okay? So first and foremost, you keep hearing me use the word list. It is very much like a smart list meant to be list-driven data, okay? So we're not building financial statements here. We're building list, real-world, useful data, okay? Now, while I'm in here, some of those features that I've always been used to, the ability to add columns, from over here on the right, I can go ahead and add those columns, and you can see they've been added. Now, if that was a horrible mistake and I shouldn't have done that, I can very quickly get rid of those columns, okay? And now my data is back to where it was. One quick little thing here with respect to your data is it is multi-company by default. So there's nothing I have to do to be able to pull a list of data from all of my company databases. It just is natural within PopDoc. Okay, it's not even a setting I have to choose. All right, now with those columns, once they're out here, I can move them around. So if I wanted my customer name to be first, for example, I just drag it over here, or I could drag it back if I wanted it back there. And I can even do grouping, so I can pivot. So let me put a state out there, for example. Okay, so now I've got my state here, and I can drag that up to the top, and now I've got a pivoted report based on state, and within each of those states, I can see which customers I have to collect from, okay? And notice that each of my, anywhere where I've got a number is going to summarize once I pivot it. And I'll show you later, I can fully define what each of these columns does by default when I pivot it like that. Okay, so moving along the top, we do have the ability to have favorites. Okay, so very much like you're used to with your SmartList. So on my breadcrumbs here, you can see I've got, 5 different favorites. So I can very quickly see my Minnesota customers if I want to, versus my collections list, which is where we just were. Okay, so switching between my favorites, wicked easy here. Now when it comes to filtering, I saved this as a favorite because I wanted to keep this filter in this particular column layout. I do want to alleviate some of your post-traumatic stress. Hopefully some of you are breathing a sigh of relief when you see me do this. You can go well beyond your 4 query limit, and I can mix and match my ands and ors. So it doesn't all have to be ands or all have to be ors. I can really start to build meaningful queries here. Okay, now I'm going to cancel that and come back in real quick. For the rest of it, it does operate the way you would expect it to. So if I search up a date, for example, okay, let's choose our created date. I've got all of the operators that I might want. So, obviously the equals then, the greater than, all of that. I can put in fixed dates if that's my need for this particular list. But I can also use compare values. So now I can get, all my customers that were created this week or this month. Okay, or I could build a range between the start of last month and the end of this month, all of those relative dates, and that's always relative to right now. Okay, so again, lots of powerful filtering like we're used to having. That everyone, my connection did disconnect for a moment. It tells me now that I am reconnected. I see a question in the queue. Was the sound lost? Yes, it was, and I have no excuse other than to apologize. I believe where we left off was with filtering, and I was simply pointing out that I could have a date filter that was using relative dates. Okay, now where I started to go after I talked about that was the ability to export to Excel. So we do have that ability. Once I click on that, it would take the data that's currently on my screen and drop it out to Excel. Okay, now you guys might have noticed some of these little carrots and words around the sides here. Okay, these are what I mentioned earlier called details. Okay, so for example, I'm looking at Alton Manufacturing and I'm getting a little map of where is Alton Manufacturing, okay, and it's all based on who have I selected, okay. I also have the ability to have, for example, my sales by item here, so I can see while I'm looking at this customer, what do they normally buy from us. Okay, I could take a look at all of their sales transactions down here at the bottom to see what all we have sold, we have done with them. And finally, I could right-click and take a look at the underlying receivables transactions so that I could see what exactly is outstanding here, and that would even give me the ability to continue editing to start adding columns and such. Okay, so these details allow you to put more context in the fingers of your end users. Now, quick note on details, all of these ones that I've shown you are actually coming from the same connector. So I'm showing you lots of data from GP about data that I'm getting from GP. But this could come from anywhere. I could have this same customer list and have a tab down here that shows me all of my open opportunities in my CRM. I could have another tab over here that shows me all of the open tickets that they have in my help desk solution, or all of the shipments that are outstanding for them in my ShipStation. You know, whatever information it is that I have about this customer can all be brought into one spot for my users to actually consume as they see fit. Now we'll come back to some more functionality in a little while to talk about that interactivity, but I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. So what I've shown you here is really kind of how an end user might experience PopDoc in a very similar fashion to how your current users are experiencing SmartList, okay? Obviously with some significant enhancements. But now I want to kind of jump into that SmartList Builder scenario so that we can start to talk about, you know, why I switched the word steroids to gamma radiation. So I'm going to click on the hamburger up here first, and I'm going to go take a look at connectors. Okay. Now, before we really dig in, I want to click on this add connector and just point out, if you remember, I talked about all my data being able to come from anywhere. Okay. And I really do mean anywhere. So I do have obviously my Dynamics GP connector, and we're going to dig into that in a couple minutes. But I've also got so many other connectors. I mean, we do have other ERPs. I don't know. I know some people are sometimes looking around them. PopDoc can still be a viable option if you happen to move anywhere else. But we've also got a bunch of the major CRMs covered. So your Salesforce, your Dynamics CRM, you can see here HubSpot, and there's a couple of others in here, MailChimp, for example. So from the higher end to the lower end type products, those are in there. Okay, we've got Dataverse covered out there if you happen to have that. If you wanted to have data in an Azure Data Lake, we've got that. But everything I've talked about so far is really dealing with ERP and CRM, right? What about the rest of your business? Well, take a look at things like GitHub or Bitly, or further down we've got Twitter, right? So you can take PopDoc, which is providing you SmartList type functionality, and start to apply it to all different parts of your company. Okay, and now you can give access to data from pretty much anywhere. Now, when I do say anywhere, if you remember earlier, I did the low grelly anywhere. That's really what I meant, because I've got SQL Server here. So if I have data on-premise in my SQL Server, or even a SQL Server stored out on Azure, I can get access to that and again present it through PopDoc. And then this REST service, as the world is moving more and more online, as you guys start to have online services, you know, maybe a warehouse management or a fleet management solution. I've seen some asset management ones out there. HR is a big one that are out there as online applications. Most of them have a RESTful API, which means we can connect to that and use that now as a data source for a PopDoc list. Okay, so we've got about 60 out of the box, and that list is always growing. We're always adding new stuff, but you have the ability to make that even bigger just based on this. All right, now let me go back and take a look at my GP connector since we are talking SmartList on gamma radiation. Okay. All right, so the first thing I want you to notice is everything here is customizable. If I don't call my companies in my GP environment, I can rename them to divisions, okay? In this case, while we have a structure in place, this is a 100% customizable solution for you, okay? We do have locales available, so within PopDoc, you know, if you want, I'm not sure where in the world everybody on this call is, but if you want to see your numbers and dates in a format that is local to you, you can do that. We have that actually at multiple levels. For example, I live in Canada. I'm a Canadian, and I work for an American company. Now, by default, they've got all of their lists to show dates and numbers in an American format. I choose to look at them in a Canadian format, just makes more sense to me. So I can actually override all of the settings on all of the lists to make it Canadian formatting. Okay, and it's a really simple setting. I made it sound like it was a lot more work than it was. I don't know why I did that. That's a terrible demo thing. All right. Now, over and above being completely customizable, now we have the actual lists. And this section I'm looking at right now is my base list section. Okay. Now, we give you about 91 lists out of the box when you first set up the connector. With that connector, with those 91 lists, they tend to look pretty much like the list that you get by default out of SmartList. But you also have the ability to add more lists. Okay, so you have the ability to add any of the lists that you've built using SmartList Builder. You also have the ability to add any tables or views that maybe you haven't accessed through SmartList Builder yet. So you can get right down to that table level within SmartList. Okay, now whatever connector you're connecting to will define for you what's available as a base list. For example, if this was a REST API we were connecting to, it would depend on all of the REST endpoints that were available from that particular API. Okay, now with each of these lists, very much like SmartList Builder, I have the ability to start to modify them. Okay, again, I can change the names and all of that stuff if I wanted to. I've got my fields here where I can, if you remember I told you I can change how those fields behave when grouping happens. So I could, for example, this isn't a great list to have chosen, but I could choose the maximum description, for example, on grouping. Again, not the best example, but you can see that I'm changing it here. I'm going to change it back before someone yells at me. Okay, so I can add or remove fields there if I need to. I can also add calculated fields. Okay, now I like to show this for a couple reasons. First, I came into this saying no code, no code, no code, and it's absolutely true unless I don't want it to be. Now, in the case of a GP connection, I can use a SQL formula if I want to. So if I happen to know SQL, I can do that. Or I can use PopDoc script, which is actually what I choose to do when I'm doing this, even though I've spent almost my entire career using SQL. Okay, because it's wicked easy. So I've got all these formulas here that are very similar to the formulas. Hey, John, how you doing? So for everyone who can't see this, I have a question from John in Alaska, who I haven't talked to in a very long time, actually. He's asking, will the PopDoc list be accessible from within GP? Unfortunately, right now they're not, but I will show you a way to make them accessible through Excel. Where was I here? Oh, okay, so I'm adding a formula here. So it's all grouped by function. Okay, and I can choose, whatever function I want to have. It's going to ask me to fill this in, and again, I've got that concept of using either fields or relative dates or what have you, whatever's important here. And once I save that, you can see it filled in this formula for me. Now, if I happen to know this formula off the top of my head, I can actually just go ahead and type it in and use it. Okay, all of my fields from my list are available here in a drop-down. So if I wanted to include them in the formula, I just select them like that. Okay, so we've tried to make this as simple as possible. And honestly, if you've ever built an Excel formula, you can use a PopDoc script. It's very, very similar. Okay, so that's our calculated fields. Once I've added a calculated field, it just behaves like any other field, okay, where I can even choose a summary method. So if it needs to be, if this was a number, maybe a gross margin, I could have a sum or an average or what have you. And then finally, I'm choosing my default fields, and I can move them around with these arrows. If I wanted to add a default field, I can just choose it from here and put it in. So again, I told you I was going to say this a number of times. I'm not writing code, I'm making choices. Okay, that's all I'm doing here to design how this list looks. I talked about restrictions before, so these might be, for example, we had a client a while ago with 6 different divisions, and they wanted us to restrict their lists by division. So we used a restriction right here, and this is just like in SmartList Builder, it's something the user can't override on their own. Okay. Finally, I'll show you details while we're here. Okay. Now, the reason I like to show details is just to show you that we're not writing code, we're making choices. Okay, so I come in here and I can choose what type of detail do I want. So iframe was the Google map that I showed you. I showed you a couple of different lists. One of those lists I showed you was a chart, and another one was an actual list. Okay, I can choose how many records are allowed to be in that list. And here I'm choosing what data is going into that detail. And again, just to prove it out, that data doesn't have to come from the same system. I could pull in data from other places and show you those details as well. Okay, then I choose where I want to see it. I add a filter to give it that context sensitivity. And again, I'm just choosing, making choices. Okay, and then that's it. I have a detail that my users can use, and I've added it. I mean, I was talking the whole time, and I've got what essentially could be a working detail here in, less than a minute. Okay, so again, we're trying to offer you as much flexibility with as little effort as possible. All right, so that's base lists. Okay, let me go back to my connector here. Okay, now I want to talk about custom lists because now we're starting to get into a little bit more power. Okay, so custom lists allow me to mix and match other lists into new ones. Okay, so I like to start at these bottom two because frankly they're the most boring when it comes to describing. So summarize a list. Basically what that does for anyone on the call who knows anything about SQL, that's basically a group by list. And for everyone else, we're just pre-aggregating our data. So I might want to look at my, inventory by location by GL account. And then I have a bunch of aggregated fields there, like the sum of the expense and the average of the unit cost and the sum of the quantity, stuff like that. So it's just a way to give users a pre-aggregated list. We're restricting data in a list. Now the key difference between this and what I showed you earlier where I was modifying the restriction is when I modified the restriction earlier, I was modifying the base list. So now everybody who used that list forever and anon would have that restriction in place. But if I wanted to keep that base list and just create a version of it that was restricted, I could click on this restrict data in a list, and now, boom, I've got both a restricted version and a non-restricted version, which I can then use security to grant access to. Okay, I have the ability to merge lists as well. Okay, now merging a list, again, for my SQL friends, is going to be a union. For everyone else, what I'm doing is I'm combining two lists together to create a single list. Okay, so if we think about GP in particular, my favorite example there is sales transactions. So I've got two different groups of posted sales transactions in GP. I've got my open sales transactions, which are those that are not fully paid, and I've got my historical sales transactions, which is those that are fully paid. Okay, now to make those come together, they're actually in two different parts of GP. To make them work together, I have to create a merge that creates a single list out of those two different parts. Now, here's where this kind of gets exciting. It doesn't have to be a merge of the same system. Okay, so I could, for example, let's say you guys had a system that you put in place before you moved to GP, and you still reference that from time to time. Maybe you've got lot tracking requirements that go that far back. I can merge the history from my old system with my GP data, my go-forward GP data, and now I've got one big list. I had a customer I was talking to earlier today where between their different divisions, they're running different accounting solutions. Okay, so we were able to talk to them about creating a merge list that brought sales data from all of their different accounting systems into a single list. And now they can view all of their sales in one SmartList type experience, which required a lot of finagling from them to do that previously in, they were doing something similar in Excel. Okay. We've also got join lists. So anyone who's ever used a reporting tool ever knows what a join is. But again, the power here, that superpower level, is that data doesn't have to come from the same system, right? So I don't have to take two GP tables and join them together, for example, customers and their addresses or sales orders and their lines. I can actually start to combine data from different solutions. So one of my favorite examples would be a collection report where I'm pulling balance and aging and customer information from my ERP. I'm blending that with telephone preferences and email preferences from my CRM, maybe a summary of the open opportunities, a dollar value or something like that, and combining that. I don't think it's frozen. I think I just haven't done anything for a bit. So yeah, that's what a join list does, is brings that data together. And then finally a compare list. What that does is it compares two lists together and shows you all of the records that from the first list that either do or do not exist in the second. So a good example of this, I had a customer who built an integration into the job module. And within the job module, when they posted those transactions, for some reason, not all of them were hitting the general ledger. So we created a compare list that compared all of the posted project transactions to all of the posted general ledger transactions and showed us all the job transactions that didn't exist in the general ledger. Okay, and we were able to do that. Honestly, it took a little bit less time than it took me to describe it to build out that list. So if I take a look at one of these things, again, just to prove to you that we're making choices and not writing code, okay, I first have to choose which lists I'm joining here. So I'm going to choose, whatever my two lists are. Okay, so maybe I've got, I don't know why I chose my equipment record, but let's go ahead and use that. Then I'm going to add my second list. Okay, and again, it doesn't have to come from the same connector. It can come from my CRM or my help desk or what have you. I'm just going to pull any one of them here. Okay, and then I'm just going to define what is my connecting fields here. Okay, and then boom, I have a joined list. Now I come through and I select what fields I want to have available within my list. Okay, not writing code, just clicking boxes. Then I can come through, I can add any of those calculated fields I need, choose which fields are here by default. Okay, and now I have a working list that I can now expose to my end users. All right. So I just have a couple more things I want to make sure I show you while we're here. And one of them is, I mentioned earlier PopDoc Widgets. So I want to show you a couple of those in action. So let me jump out to Teams here. And I'm in my team here, my Teams demo team. Okay, and I've got a tab called my collections list. Now this is that exact same list I just showed you. Okay, so I've got Barry Medical. I can see what they've been buying from us the same way that I could before. I can click here and see all of my sales orders for whoever I've got selected up top. Okay, all of that same details that I had before. Okay, I have the same ability to filter. I have the ability, if I turn it on, to create and use favorites while I'm in here. I can turn this list into a chart. All of that functionality that I've shown you from an end user perspective is available to me here outside of PopDoc and outside of GP. So if you think about this from, your company perspective, maybe you've got users who are, in the warehouse and they do work in Teams. I can embed shipping data or inventory data right here in Teams. I'm not building an integration. I'm simply adding a tab. And just to show you how easy it is to do this, every widget that we create has something called a widget ID. And all I have to do is copy it from PopDoc and paste it here. And then I've got a list. It's literally that simple to embed something in Teams. And it's really, really powerful and really helpful. Now, here's a real world use case I like to show it for 3 reasons. Okay, this is pulling from something called Zendesk. Now, Zendesk is an online help desk solution. We do have a standard connector for it, but we're using the REST API to get access to their data. So I like to use this because it's proven we're pulling data from the interweb and we're exposing it here through Teams. Okay, the real world use case here is a lot of companies who are running Zendesk will have escalation engineers, and those escalation engineers don't want to log into the help desk solution because they're not the help desk. So what we'll do here is we'll expose the tickets to them through PopDoc, and I'm going to take out status here. We'll expose this to them. They have access to comments, okay, and we'll filter this list. For example, if this was a Smart Connect chat room, then we would filter this to Smart Connect tickets. They can see what's going on with this ticket, but, and this is the other reason I like to show this, they also have the ability to have actions. So I could click on add comment, for example. I can add a comment to this ticket and push it in. So from your perspective, sorry, I put too many semicolons in there. I broke it. But from your perspective, this could be creating GP data. For example, this could be creating a contact in CRM. You can even kick off a Smart Connect map from here. So if this ticket was ready to be invoiced, I could right-click, I could select the Smart Connect process that creates invoices, and in GP, I would now have an invoice. I can also kick off a Power Automate flow. So if I wanted to write a message to Teams, for example, like this one, that this invoice was just created and how much it was, I can do that using Power Automate and call that from one of my PopDocs. Okay, just one last example of embedding data anywhere. I'm going to come back in here. Now this is dynamic CRM. I could show you this in Salesforce. I could show you this in a number of systems. I just chose CRM to give you a sense that within my CRM, I can use PopDoc to bring all of my data together for my end users. Okay, so for example, here I'm exposing all of my ERP orders, and I've got, again, all of that functionality I showed you before with favorites and filters and columns and all of that jazz. I could show you the Zendesk one here again, and again, I could right-click and add a comment, you know, and the cool thing about this is it's context sensitive here too. So I'm only seeing the tickets associated with this particular account. Okay, so you're able to pre-filter your data for your users, creating really meaningful lists and really helpful stuff. All right, now a couple questions in the queue. Does using PopDoc in Teams use a GP license? No, it does not. Okay, nor does it use a license for pretty much any of the systems we connect to. So when you first create a connection, let me go through, I'm going to add a GP1. I won't fully add it. I just want to show you what it looks like. So when I come into my GP to add a connection, I've got a few different ways that I can connect to this server. So first off, if I'm willing to expose my SQL Server to the interweb and open up a port, we do have a list of IP addresses that you can whitelist on your side. Okay, then I can use SQL Server login. We do also have a gateway that we can give you that gets installed, I think, on the SQL Server itself. It has 2 different ways to authenticate. You can either issue a bearer token or we can use basic authentication. So both of those will work. And then just so you guys know, when you do move to PopDoc, you do have access to a sample data connector if you want to just create another GP1 just to mess around with. Okay, so whatever information, whichever I choose, right? So if it's a gateway, I just have to put the URL and the token. In the case of the SQL Server, I tell it what port it's on and what is my system database. Okay, and I pass it in. Now that's going to be what we use to gain access to your Dynamics GP. Okay, and again, any system you connect to is kind of similar. It's going to have whatever the login requirements are for that system. And then you're just consuming data. Okay, so John's mind just exploded, which is awesome. That's what I hope to achieve in every single webinar that I do. So I'm glad to see that I've blown at least one mind. Um, Let me scroll down to this one. So if you were to join some tables, purchasing, inventory, and sales, and when the smart list is run, it takes a long time and locks the user. Is this large data pull better in PopDoc? Not locking up in Great Plains. So yes, we definitely wouldn't be locking up Great Plains. Probably what we would want to do with you, Laura, is work with you to streamline that query. It sounds like you've got a long-running query there that could use a little bit of work, but it would definitely be sitting outside of GP, so you wouldn't be hanging GP most likely. But yeah, I'm more than happy to talk to you about your specific scenario at some point. Let's see here. We've had a few more come in. Okay, so is PopDoc a web-based tool and not an installed program, or can it be either? It is web-based. It lives 100% in the internet, and then you can embed it wherever you need to use it. And I do want to show you one or two more things within here as well from a SmartList on gamma radiation standpoint, but yeah, it's 100% web-based. There's no installation. The only possible installation is for your GP environment. If you chose to use the gateway, you would have to do an installation there. Okay. That actually answers the next question as well. Now, Brian asked a similar question, but a little bit differently. And the last part of his question, we have a PHI that can't be sent to a hosted instance. So I'm going to answer that the way I can think of. And if it doesn't answer you specifically, I'm going to get you to drop me an email directly, and then we can chat that one out. So when it comes to storing data, we don't store any of your data. It's 100% pass-through. We do have a caching that we just turned on that the data can live there for 20 minutes, but it doesn't, we don't store it anywhere other than in cache. So if that doesn't meet your requirement, then reach out to me. We haven't had any requirements like that we haven't met. We meet the GDPR requirements in Europe, which is pretty much the most strict one I've rubbed up against so far, but just reach out to me directly and let me know. Okay. Okay, so this is a good question, and then I'm going to jump back in and throw a couple more features, and then we'll come back to questions in a second. So is there a transaction count limit? We have millions of records. So there's not necessarily a limit put in place by us. Now, some APIs that you connect to will have limits in place, and there's nothing we can do to work around those, right? Like that Zendesk one I showed you, I think the most you can pull back in a minute is like 500 or 600 transactions or something like that per minute. So we would work with you to help optimize your queries. Now, the one limitation you would have is the memory on the PC. So it's a web-based application, and the misnomer that a lot of people have is web-based applications don't require any local memory, but that's simply not true. We do have users pulling back tens of thousands of records, John, and we do paging on that, which is an option for you. But generally, I don't know that I would recommend pulling millions of records into memory. I would work on pre-filtering that data so that when we query it, we're maybe pulling back the thousands of records we care about. Okay, so I'm going to come back to, I know there's a couple more questions in the queue. I'm going to come back to those in a minute. I do want to make sure that we get to a couple other features that are pretty slick, given how technical some of you seem to be. So I'm going to go to the developer tab now. So we talked about connectors, and just so you guys know, there's a truckload of stuff that I could show you here. I teach an 8-hour boot camp on this, and it's still not enough time for me to get to all the features. So just know that everything you've seen so far that's been exciting, that's not just the sizzle. That's just what I have time to show you today. There is other stuff too, which I'd be happy to dig in with any of you. So I'm going to go to my developer tab here. So I want to talk about two things while we're here. The first is widgets. Okay, so the widgets are these things. So this is a widget right here. Now what I like to show here is, again, you're probably getting sick of hearing me say it, but a widget is about making choices and not about running code. With that said, some of the embedding might require a little bit of code. Okay, but when I come in here, I'm choosing, for example, this is a single list widget. Okay, what that means is like this one where I've got one list being displayed. Okay, when I have this single list, I choose which list it is. I choose which fields I want to display in that single list. I set up my parameters so that I can, if you remember, I made us think about the fact that this is context sensitive too. I'm using a parameter to do that. I'm passing the account number in and I'm getting just the data that I need. Okay. I can turn on and off what my users are able to do. For example, a lot of companies get hinky about their salespeople being allowed to export accounting information. So I can put it in a widget and turn off the allow export. Now they can see it, but they can't click on an export button. Okay. And this is probably the most important part. This is where potentially IT is going to get involved with you guys. Okay, so I can take this code and I can use it anywhere that accepts, really anywhere that accepts an iframe is kind of the rule of thumb. This is that widget ID I talked about earlier. So I just copy this and paste it in Teams if I want to put it in Teams. But this link address, I can drop it anywhere that accepts a web address. And now I can see that widget in action right here. So think about that. I can drop that into a SharePoint web part. I could drop that into you know, like I said, anywhere that accepts an internet address. Okay. All right. So that's widgets. Now we can use, just so you know, tokens and stuff. So there is layers of security. I'm sure there's a couple of IT folks out there right now thinking, eek. But don't worry, there is security in place for all of this. Okay. The other thing I want to show you while we're in developer, and I kind of hinted at this earlier, is this concept of API endpoints. Okay, so I can create, oh, I hit my caps lock. That's going to bug me the entire time I'm talking, just so you know. I can select any list. So, you know, let's go to our E1 SBA, for example. We'll take our field service. Let's choose that equipment list again. Okay, and I can choose a specific favorite. Okay, so all I've done here is chosen a list. I can, if I want to, add parameters that I can pass into this endpoint. But now I've got endpoints. So I can use OData, excuse me, or I can use JSON or XML. And I can copy this link right here into Excel, into Power BI, into Tableau, into anything that can consume a REST endpoint or an OData endpoint. Okay. Now, usually people will ask me, well, that seems cool, but why would I do that? Mostly for a couple of reasons. Now, you guys as GP users, I don't know if you noticed, it took me about 10 seconds to wrap a REST API around my equipment record. Okay, that's awesome. It's got bearer token security. I can now consume that anywhere that can use it, and it took me 0 lines of code. So that's pretty cool from a GP perspective. But from a Power BI and Excel perspective in particular, or a Power Query perspective, the way PopDoc handles the pulling of data is way more efficient than the way Power BI or Excel will. Or sorry, I got to start just calling it Power Query. So what Power Query does is it pulls back all the records from all your data sources first. Then it starts joining and filtering and all of that stuff. Whereas what PopDoc is doing is it's filtering your data first, it's joining your data, and then it's returning your data. Okay, so you're only getting back the records that meet your criteria. It's so much more efficient. So I can use my PopDoc to build my complex multi-system lists, and then my Power BI to make them super beautiful. I know some of you on this list I know, and I know that you've come to Power BI sessions I've taught in the past. One of my favorite BI tools. When you combine these two tools, it's awesome, just awesome. Okay, so that's really the big rocks I wanted to get through. I've got a couple more questions in the queue here, so let me go back. Okay, so there is a question here about what is the difference between a join list and a merge list. So a merge list, as I said before, is really two lists that I'm combining into a single list. So if I had 10 records in the first list and 10 records in the second list and I merge them, I've got 20 records in my list. Okay, now a join list really puts those two lists side by each and joins them together based on some relationship. So one example I used was one of my lists is the invoice headers and one of my lists is the invoice lines, and I'm connecting those together based on the relationship of the invoice number, and now I can pull fields from both of those. Now, if there were 10 invoices and each of them had one line, and I join those together, my resulting join list will have 10 records. Okay, so that's how that'll work. Okay, there's a question here on what version of GP does PopDoc work with. We go back, I believe we've said we go back to 10, but I think it's much safer to say anything that's currently supported by Microsoft, we will cover. So I know we've gone back as far as 2010. Okay, does PopDoc have a connector for Paylocity? I don't believe we have one out of the box. Let me just take a real quick look here. I don't remember seeing it on the list, but the list changes on me all the time. PayPal, but not Paylocity. But if I remember working on that API with you at one point, John, I think it should be doable. But I'm happy to, if you want to reach out to me at E1, I can work with you on that and take a look. Okay, now there's a longer question, so I'm going to be quiet for about 10 seconds while I try to read this one. Okay, so essentially it's how is it connecting, or how is PopDoc connecting to our GP, and what exactly is it using? So the last part of the question is, if we move to PopDoc, does this pull data directly from the SQL tables, or will it use SmartView and SmartList Builder functions? So the answer is actually both. So within our GP connector, I do have the ability to pull in SmartLists that I've previously built. So those are fully available to me. I also have the ability to pull in direct from tables or views as well, either in the company databases or in the system database, depending how that's set up in your environment. Awesome. You guys are doing really great with the questions today. I think I've poked all the ones that are out there for now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up that last slide real quick, the one with email addresses and such. Now, I didn't put mine on there for some reason. I'm not sure. I must have pulled this in from another deck. So just so you guys know, I am rod.o'connor at e1solutions.com. O'Connor is spelled O-C-O-N-N-O-R. So rod, R-O-D, .o'connor at e1solutions.com. If you do think of questions after the fact, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to sales@e1solutions.com. Or if you happen to know who your account manager is here at E1 Solutions, I know they'd be happy to talk to you as well and help to answer any questions that you guys might have. All right, well, I don't see anything else in the queue, so I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to apologize for that technical difficulty we had there for a couple minutes. I do thank all of you who stuck around. I really do appreciate, you sticking around for this. Hopefully more minds were blown than just that one. I'm happy to try again. If you guys didn't quite have your minds blown but want to, let me know that as well. All right. Well, with that, thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.